Hi guys, welcome back. Today we're going to be painting a realistic giraffe. If you want to know exactly how I made those spots so realistic, be sure to watch to the end. For our cute little giraffe today, you can see I've already sketched it on. This is a free image that I got on Unsplash. So we're going to start with the background on this, and I'm just going to do a basic wet and wet technique, and I'm going to paint around the silhouette of my giraffe's head, just with water first. There are some areas I'm going to let the water touch the giraffe, just so we can have a little bit of blending between our background and the giraffe. So I'm going to paint a little bit over these, what are they called? Horns? And a little bit inside of the ears too. Take some of this kind of periwinkle blue and just drop that into my sky, painting right up to the ears but not inside of them. And using a different brush, I'm going to grab just a little bit of watered down yellow ochre and very quickly paint the ear with that yellow ochre on the wet paper. And you can see there's a little bit of lovely blending happening between those two tones. I want my giraffe to look like he's part of an environment and not just pasted on to a sky behind him. So using that same technique, grabbing a little bit of yellow ochre, painting in the side of his face here, just so we'll have this kind of cool washed out effect as he blends into his environment. If you want your painting to look really, really cool and not just like it's a cutout, have a variety of edges. Edges are something that artists are constantly working on. It's not something that I think I'll ever perfect, but that's okay because it's a process, it's a journey, and it's something I'm excited to get better at. Okay, I'm gonna keep adding blue here before that gets to be a hard edge. Timing is everything with watercolor. You have to work really fast so that no streaks or weird edges form. And sometimes even if you try to control it as best you can, it just does what it wants. So I'm actually doing a little bit of wet on dry here inside of the giraffe's face. Still just using yellow ochre. I keep grabbing some water if I want it to be a little lighter, not so vibrant. So I'm just going to get a quick wash in here on the shadow side of our giraffe. His neck is all in shadow, so it's not going to be very light. But we'll just start with a light layer to begin with, again, to be conservative and just to be able to start developing our values. We'll push them darker later. There's no right or wrong way to do this. You really just have to experiment, try it for yourself and see what you like best, what techniques, what approaches, and I think that's a great way to develop your style. All right, while this area is still wet, I'm going to start dropping in some suggestions of these trees, these kind of savanna trees back behind our giraffe. And I want them to bleed out a little bit, and that's why I'm painting them on while my sky is still wet. I'm just using this dabbing motion with the tip of my mop brush to suggest loose foliage back here. Not at all being a perfectionist about this, but I am mixing up my colors a little bit. I'm not going to do it all with one color because that's boring. So I have a combination here of lemon yellow. This is a Terra Verte green by Holbein, and then this is an undersea green by Daniel Smith. So I think this combination of these three colors is quite lovely and is bleeding out nicely into my background. Drop a little bit back here. That got a little too dark, so I'm going to water that down and suggest a tree right there behind him. Nice, I'm pretty happy with that. Okay, so time to get more detailed. I like to start by blocking in the basic shadow values, and since I'm right-handed, I tend to work left to right. And so I'm going to start up here with this ear, which has really begun to dry, and that's a good thing because we want our details to not blend in so much. So I'm taking kind of this gray color and starting to paint the shadow. I've switched to a smaller brush. This is a Princeton Neptune size 8 round brush, one of my favorite synthetic brushes. And you'll notice I'm doing a little bit of negative painting here, leaving some of those hairs that are overlapping the inside of the ear, leaving the white of the paper showing there. I'm not going to paint a full outline on this ear because I want to leave that soft edge where it sort of blends into the background. So this little area here between these two darker spots, I'm just going to leave that alone. I'm not going to paint any kind of edge there. our imagination fills in those gaps for us. You don't have to paint every single detail. I think it's more beautiful when you don't. Here's another area I'm going to leave alone and not paint an edge. Just above the eyelash right there is going to be left alone. No specific edge painting at all. Up here where the values are a little darker, I am going to paint it entirely in. But because I allowed that color to bleed into the sky a little bit, I think it does look like it's connected to the background, connected to the environment. If you'd like to follow along and try this painting for yourself but feel like the video is just moving too fast, click on the link in the description below for a fully narrated real-time version of this tutorial, as well as my reference photo and sketch. While you're there, be sure to grab my free guide on watercolor basics. All right, let's get back to the video. Painting something in a background is kind of next level when it comes to your painting. If you've been working on learning how to do different fur techniques and just how to paint animals that are isolated, that's great and it's incredible practice. But if you want to step it up to the next level, start to paint animals inside of a background, inside of an environment, and you'll see it brings a whole new challenge to your painting because you have to learn how to relate the two elements. Slowing down here as I paint these details, I'm using indigo and burnt sienna and yellow ochre are the three colors you see layered here. Introducing a new color here. This is Burnt Umber by Daniel Smith. I use this all the time on my animal paintings. And there's a couple little light ridges in the face here that I'm trying to paint around to leave those highlights. Let the light color of the paper show through beneath. But they're not white, so I'm going to come back in and just drop some yellow ochre into those spaces and let it blend with the darker color that I just painted around it. There is a hard edge I see with a dark tone just right along the side of the face here, and that is going to articulate the edge for us. Start to paint in some of the nose details. This will go darker later, but for now I just want to make sure I don't lose my drawing underneath the paint. So if I paint in those details, then I'll be able to see them as I go darker. Now this muzzle right here is super fuzzy, so I'm splaying my brush like this to get the tips of the bristles to just kind of come out at all which ways, and I'm just dabbing around the muzzle here and pulling in a little bit to show you how to do this fuzzy fur technique here. This is probably the most textured area on the giraffe, so let's emphasize that. Let's play it up and make it fun. This edge is starting to dry, so I have to keep an eye on that, make sure that it doesn't get too hard. So I'm coming back into there and working around the eyes and in the forehead. This is a little bit looser painting style than I usually do, but it's a lot of fun to kind of mix it up and maybe include a little less details than I normally do. Okay, this is a watered down indigo, nice dark blue that has sort of a neutral look in shadows and makes a beautiful gray tint. I'm painting that in the shadow side of the face. I see a color temperature change here as it comes towards the eye, becomes a little warmer. So I'm trying to indicate that with the yellow ochre. Working very wet right now. Soften that edge with a little bit of cleanish water. We'll grab some darker tones in here where these kind of streaks are happening on his forehead. And the paint is still wet, the paper's still wet, so it's bleeding out a little bit, and that's good, that's what I want. Make sure whenever blooms or bleeding happens that it's intentional. Really, that does just take practice and experience to know how the paper and how the paint are gonna respond. But even still, with years of practice, it can be unpredictable at times, depending on how much water you use. The more water you use, the more unpredictable the paint will be. The less water, the more controlled you can be. This indigo by Daniel Smith is one of my very favorite colors for shadows and for my deepest, darkest values in a painting. It goes almost black in its most pigmented form, but it's a little more transparent and it just mixes really nicely with browns and yellows and really anything. So yeah, I recommend this. It's a one of my go-to paint colors. I just have to have it on my palette. Our lovely little giraffe is really starting to come together. Now that this ear is dry, I can articulate these unique shapes inside of his ear a little more. There's kind of a triangle shape in that one, and then sort of this oval. It's like this trio of shapes inside of the ears. Adding some burnt sienna, which is a warmer brown. It's got some nice reddish tones in it. Bring some of that into the muzzle here. A loose wet and wet wash. All right, I'm going to paint this eye right here. I'm going to switch to a smaller brush. This is a silver black velvet size 4 round brush, and it comes to a tiny little point that gets the job done quite well for me. The eye details I really do slow down for. I don't want to mess these up. While I have that wet paint on my brush, I'll pop some of that dark fur texture into these areas up here. Rinse my brush. Grab a little lighter version of my indigo to drop into this area beneath the eyelash. Still using indigo on the eye, and I'm leaving a teeny tiny little highlight right here on the far side of the eye. Okay, it's time to work our way down into the neck, mixing up some yellow ochre and burnt sienna for this reddish mane. Still using my tiny size 4 round brush and just quickly pulling the paint out, creating this kind of scooping motion. And you can see it comes to a nice fine little point for this hair texture along the back of the giraffe's neck. Bringing in some burnt umber and indigo to darken the shadow while it's still wet so that it blends with that burnt sienna mixture. All right, I'm using the sweeping broad side of my brush to wash on a really quick, even layer of this burnt umber and indigo mixture on the neck. And I'm gonna let that dry before I add the spot details. And since that's the last thing we need to do, we'll just let that dry for a minute. The very last thing now is to add the spots on the neck. And so I'm gonna mix up enough paint so that I don't have to mix it halfway through. I'm gonna mix up a mixture of burnt umber, burnt sienna, and a little bit of indigo to darken it. So I've got a generous amount of paint on my brush, and I'm just going to carefully observe my reference photo and paint the spots. I don't want my edges to be super hard, so I'm also gonna take a clean, damp brush and swipe the edges of the spots to soften those edges. You have to do this right after you paint the spot, otherwise it will dry and you will have missed your window of time to do that. So I'm holding 2 brushes at the same time, using one to paint the spots and the stripes and the other to just blend out the edges. Okay, there we go. I think that looks pretty good. And you can see how softening the edges really helped it blend back into the shadow and not look too cut out like spots that are just pasted on. And even though I painted this giraffe fairly loosely, you can see it looks really realistic because we got the values right. So there's our giraffe. I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial. If you did, please be sure to hit the like button and subscribe if you're new here. Turn on notifications so you never miss any new videos. I'll be posting new videos every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. Thank you so much for watching today.